The international response confirmed how accurate Rueff had been. European finance ministers were not surprised by the suspension itself. They had been expecting it, but they were astonished by how perfectly it matched the timeline and conditions Rueff had been predicting since the 1950s. Internal communications later released through the Freedom of Information Act revealed a bitter truth. American officials knew they were proving Rueff right, but political optics forced them to deny it publicly. In the months following August 1971, the U.S. struggled with floating exchange rates, inflation, and growing trade imbalances. Without the discipline of gold convertibility, these problems became permanent features of the international financial system. The temporary fixes of the Smithsonian Agreement only patched over a fundamentally transformed monetary system. Remarkably, Jacques Rueff lived to witness the fulfillment of his predictions. The system had collapsed almost exactly along the timeline and mechanism he had calculated. America had ignored warnings for decades, but mathematics does not care about politics. The countdown Rueff started in 1944 had finally reached zero, reshaping the global economy for decades to come. And here's the chilling part. The lessons are still relevant. The very same patterns Rueff identified, massive deficit spending, currency creation beyond productive capacity, dismissal of warnings, are repeating today. Instead of promising gold, modern dollars are backed by faith in the government to honor an impossible debt. We have swapped one mathematical impossibility for another. Our national debt has soared beyond $33 trillion, growing faster than the economy can produce real wealth. Foreign powers are beginning to question the stability of the dollar's global role, just as they questioned gold convertibility in the 1960s. The mathematics haven't changed, only the timeline has shortened, and history is quietly rhyming once again, as it did for Rueff's warning 80 years ago. The first major challenge came from France. President Charles de Gaulle, in February 1965, publicly criticized the dollar's dominance, calling it an exorbitant privilege. He demanded a return to the gold standard, citing the same mathematical arguments Rueff had been making for over a decade. De Gaulle wasn't just talking, he was acting. Between 1963 and 1966, France systematically converted large amounts of dollars into gold, repatriating over 3,300 tons from American vaults. Other countries began following suit. From 1964 to 1965, foreign gold redemptions accelerated, putting immense pressure on U.S. reserves. Even allies privately warned America that the system was becoming unsustainable. British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan suggested to President Kennedy that the dollar should be devalued to $70 per ounce of gold to restore balance. Kennedy rejected the idea, confident in American economic strength. The pattern was becoming clear. Every warning Rueff had given was unfolding exactly as predicted. Yet publicly, American officials denied any systemic problems, calling criticism outdated thinking or European jealousy. By 1968, the situation became undeniable. The London gold pool, created to suppress gold prices and maintain confidence in dollar convertibility, was losing gold at an unsustainable rate, 1,000 tons in just 3 months. Panic spread as foreign governments raced to convert dollars to gold. Switzerland, Belgium, and the Netherlands joined France in accumulating gold, creating the exact confidence crisis Rueff had predicted. Even then, the U.S. maintained a public stance that these were temporary disruptions, insisting the fundamentals of the dollar remained solid. Yet private meetings show officials were frantically discussing emergency measures to limit gold outflows, fully aware the math was impossible, but unable to admit it publicly. By 1969, even American economists acknowledged the contradictions Rueff had highlighted decades earlier. Robert Triffin's work at Yale confirmed that the system's structure made collapse mathematically certain. Still, Rueff's warnings from 25 years prior were largely ignored or treated as old news. The breaking point finally arrived in August 1971 at Camp David, Maryland. President Richard Nixon sat across from his economic advisors, staring at numbers that would have made Jacques Rueff both satisfied and grim. After 27 years of ignoring warnings about mathematical impossibility, America was finally facing exactly what Rueff had predicted. U.S. gold reserves had fallen to just over 10,000 tons, while foreign claims on American gold exceeded $40 billion at the official rate of $35 per ounce. The United States owed more gold than existed in Fort Knox, the Federal Reserve, and every other U.S. repository combined. This wasn't a temporary liquidity problem or a confidence hiccup that better communication could fix. This was the endgame Rueff had calculated back in 1944, playing out precisely as he had outlined. The system required America to provide dollars globally through balance of payments deficits, but those deficits had now surpassed the amount of gold the country could actually promise. Paul Volcker, then Undersecretary of the Treasury, would later admit privately what everyone in that room already knew. The French had been right all along. Nixon's administration faced a dilemma. Even as the math proved Rueff correct, political realities made it impossible to publicly admit the system's flaw. Instead, the solution was to frame the collapse exactly as Rueff had predicted: a temporary emergency caused by foreign speculation with promises of eventual restoration. On the evening of August 15, 1971, Nixon addressed the nation. He announced the temporary suspension of dollar convertibility into gold, blamed foreign speculators for forcing the emergency, and vowed to restore stability to international monetary relations. Every detail of this presentation mirrored what Rueff had forecasted decades earlier. The system was fundamentally unsound, yet the public narrative insisted it was merely a short-term disruption. Imagine this scene: July 1944, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The world's financial elite are celebrating what they believe will be the start of a new golden age of prosperity. Delegates are congratulating themselves for having designed the perfect monetary system, one that promises stability and growth for the post-war world. But one French economist, Jacques Rueff, sees something entirely different in the numbers and formulas they've just created. While everyone else is celebrating, Rueff is quietly identifying what he sees as a critical flaw embedded deep in the system's foundation. What Jacques Rueff figured out that summer would turn out to be prophetic over the next 27 years. His warnings about the system's unavoidable collapse would be ignored, dismissed, and even mocked, until the moment they came true with astonishing mathematical precision. Here's the part that should really grab your attention. America had an 80-year warning about the monetary crisis we're facing today. The same fundamental problems Rueff pointed out in 1944 are still glaring at us, and yet we're failing to listen. The system that world leaders toasted that summer carried a hidden flaw from the very beginning. Under Bretton Woods, the United States would provide dollars to the world as the primary reserve currency, backed by gold at $35 per ounce. On the surface, this seemed entirely reasonable, but Rueff immediately spotted the impossible math. For the world to have enough dollars for international trade, America would have to run balance of payments deficits. That means the U.S. would have to spend more abroad than it earned, effectively pumping dollars into the global economy. Here's the catch that made Rueff uneasy. Those deficits would eventually outgrow America's gold reserves. At some point, foreign governments would hold more dollar claims than the United States actually had gold to back them. Think about it like this. You promise to exchange I owe us for gold whenever someone asks, but to provide enough I owe us for everyone, you have to issue more than the gold you actually have in the vault. What happens if everyone comes at once asking for their gold? Rueff calculated that this moment wasn't some distant possibility. It was mathematically unavoidable. The system was essentially designed to collapse under its own weight. But in 1944, America was riding high on victory and economic dominance. U.S. officials brushed Rueff's warnings aside. To them, he was just another European economist stuck in old-fashioned thinking about gold. Even Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr. reportedly laughed when the issue was raised. To many in Washington, these worries seemed outdated. They believed American economic power would keep the system stable indefinitely. By the early 1950s, Rueff's warnings were already coming true. America's balance of payments deficits were growing exactly as he had predicted. Meanwhile, U.S. gold reserves, once towering at over 20,000 tons in 1949, began a slow, steady decline. The mathematics were unfolding exactly as Rueff had forecast, yet American officials continued to ignore him. In 1960, economist Robert Triffin formalized Rueff's insights in what later became known as the Triffin dilemma, proving mathematically that the system could not last indefinitely. But even then, U.S. officials dismissed it as theoretical economics, irrelevant to real-world practice. Meanwhile, Rueff kept publishing his calculations, refining the timeline, and showing exactly when and how the system would break down. He wasn't offering vague doomsday warnings. He was laying out precise mathematical proofs. Rueff even predicted how America would respond once the crisis hit. Instead of admitting the system was flawed, leaders would claim it was a temporary emergency, promising to restore gold convertibility when conditions improved, even though they knew it was impossible.